lot of the beef and dairy started as. That was dairy's inventory management program. If I breed her crossbred, I'm not tempted to keep that calf back. I'm kind of forced. We got to find another purpose for some of those calves and right size our heifer inventories. So the price is definitely a thing. I think it's a good thing for the dairy industry, but I also like there's a small hair of caution of we can get really wrapped up in calf price, but you
Hmm.
got to have everything else working right in management on the farm as well, and not get too concerned about, well, I want to change or chase the price on some of these calves because it's going to change back. Um, I don't know when, I don't know how, but
Right.
it's always fluctuating.
All right, everyone, welcome to this episode of the Dairy Podcast Show. I'm your host for today, Gail Carpenter. I am the State Dairy Extension Specialist with Iowa State University. And I'm joined today by a friend and colleague from the other side of the border in Wisconsin, joined by Ryan Sterry, who works for UW Extension. Ryan finished his bachelor's degree at UW River Falls in 2004. And then did a master's degree at UW-Madison, finishing in 2006. Since then, we were talking beforehand that you've been in extension the whole time. You never took a break from it. Currently, your title is your regional dairy educator. You've spent a lot of time in extension since then. Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got where you are and what you're working on?
Yeah, no, thanks, Gal. I really appreciate it. Yeah, where to start? I grew up a small, diversified farm. Not soon after, both parents were working off the farm, so still farming, but not necessarily full time. So got I was blessed to have that experience of being around cows and other critters and having that as a kid. And that's really that interest in animal agriculture was always there. Wasn't always sure what to do with it, but it was always there. So I did my schooling all in Wisconsin, started at River Falls. I started at the smaller school, which was good for me. By the time I got my undergrad done, I was ready for Madison. As a senior coming out of high school, I probably could have done it, but that was a big leap too. So everybody has a different path. So I was kidding beforehand for a job that I was going to try for a year or two while I was figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. I'm still kind of at that spot. Um, but I think, and you probably can relate to this a little bit too, extension is one of those unique and great careers that you can have opportunities to do different things and make some changes in your career without having to change careers. You can serve in a couple different roles, stay in the organization, not have to leave, but get some different experiences along
Mhm.
the way. So I think that's been a very unique experience. And one of the big reasons why I've stayed this long is you do to get to make some transitions and learn new things and stay fresh.
Yeah.
Adaseo, a global leader in nutritional solutions and the provider of Smart Amine M, the best in-class rumen-protected methionine product for dairy producers who want to optimize milk production, capture more value from their components, and maintain the lifetime performance of their herds. For more product information and to calculate your return on investment when you balance your feed with amino acids, go to milkpay.com.
I always tell people I have the best job in the world. I love working in extension. The people that you get to work with are great. And I think you'd probably speak to this too. You get to work with a lot of people who are problem solvers, who really want to make a difference. And to me, the land grant model doesn't really work if you don't have extension. Like there's a lot of universities out there that have teaching and they have research. But the extension side is really what makes that land grant model work, because then you're having a real impact with agriculture, whatever your field is. For us, it's dairy. But that's where you actually get to see yourself making a difference. So yeah, extension, you try it once and then it sucks you in.
It's still one of those careers. It's a way of life. You hear a lot of times, and the longer I'm in, the more I understand that.
Well, you mentioned you grew up on a diversified operation. We were chatting a little bit beforehand that you've bounced back and forth a bit between livestock and dairy in your job title as you've been working with UW Extension. So why don't we just kind of jump right into it? You and I got to start knowing each other through the four-state dairy nutrition and management group. But really started talking about, we have a mutual interest in this idea of beef on dairy. So how did what got you excited about the beef on dairy topic? How did you first start getting into that, and what has your work kind of focused on with beef on dairy?
And we really can get into the weeds on that, can't we?
We will.
Yeah, no, this is good. Uh, so maybe it ties a little bit back to my background again, just growing up around both. So my master's degree was focused on reproduction. I worked with Dr. Paul Fricke at UW Madison. So another one of those unique career trajectory things. I'm now a colleague with my former master's advisor, which is pretty cool. How many people get to have that experience, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so but reproduction does have some crossover both in dairy and beef. And so when I've been pulled in both directions in my career, that was normally the tie, whether it's some AI training or synchronization or whatnot. There's skills that have served me both in dairy and beef with that reproduction background. Now, that said, I believe it was 2018, around that, a few colleagues and myself were noticing more chatter about this, more farms experimenting with it. My beef colleagues were having conversations with producers that were starting to feed these calves. The availability of Holstein bull calves was starting to change around that time as well. And so this was that great cross program, cross team collaboration where we could get both some dairy educators and beef educators together. And so we did a first survey more as a needs assessment, because when we were starting to talk to some of our other colleagues, we are getting maybe, I don't want to say blank stares, but like, you guys are kind of making, a mountain out of a molehill, or like there's other priorities here. Which is partly true, but it was really starting to take off at that point. So we wanted to get some baseline background information. So that's where we started working together, working with dairy producers, what were breeding practices, trying to connect with some growers on what the challenges they were seeing feeding, so on and so forth. Dr. Dan Schaefer, he's retired now, Madison, was an excellent resource, helping us walk through some of, because I think at the time the Holstein steer had some negatives going for them in terms of their perception and production. The market had really changed for them at that point. So maybe some buyers had dropped out of the market, so the price was quite uncertain at that point. Um, but he was a good stabilizing force, along with a couple of my other colleagues. That there's good things about Holstein steers, the consistency. We got systems down. We know how to raise them. So when we're having these conversations with some of our beef producers, my beef colleagues, they're getting the crossbreds in. They're like, well, they're not a Holstein steer. They're half Holstein, but they're not doing the same thing. And they're just kind of gone on since then. And I know it's still a thing because we were at a mutual conference this summer, and that's probably one of the greatest hallway conversations we had, because how many we had, 4 or 5 states represented, and we're like,
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in this. You're kind of interested in this. We're having a side conversation.
Yeah, yeah. It's and up until I would say even a year ago, I was saying I'm doing this beef on dairy thing for a little bit, but I don't know. I'm not. I don't know how long I'll stay doing it. When my colleague reached out and was like, "We're trying to do some beef on dairy stuff." She's on our beef side. Said she's trying to do some more work in that, and I was like, "Well, I guess like if I have to." But the more we get into it, it's actually super cool, and it's been really exciting to see what's going on in the industry. So we started kind of a longer term project here at Iowa State um, last last fall, not fall of 2023, but fall of 2022. We started, and what we were paying for our steers or for our baby wet calves, not even steers yet, they were wet calves. We were paying for them when we started the project versus what we were paying for them when we were buying our last calves for the project. It was crazy just to see what the market had done in those few months. Um, I wish I had a crystal ball to know how long this is going to last, but we're hearing some pretty crazy numbers out there for, and we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording too about what producers are getting for these wet calves. Um, and we were saying, 800 plus bucks even for a lot of them, and that's, you know, I had to pay 400 when we first started our project, and I was like, oh, these people are gutting me for these bull calves. Um, but that's I wish I could find them for that cheap anymore. Um, it's great for the dairy producers, right? Because if when milk prices are down, we've heard from a couple of our producers like, yeah, beef on dairy is actually what's helping us stay in business right now. And being able to get money for these wet calves is what's keeping us afloat. So it's been insane to see what this market's been doing.
Definitely, definitely. And so with my reproduction background bias,
Mm,
I purposely scheduled this after we done a workshop series with Dr. Fricky and Dr. Martins in Wisconsin. I kind of want to hear more what producers are saying about repro, so on and so forth there. So I think I always come back to your pre-production program has to be there if you want to play with the sex semen and the beef on dairy
mhm,
market, so on and so forth. You got to have the fertility there. We got to be getting cows pregnant. Our memories are relatively short. It's not that many years ago when the conversation was, I short on replacements. I'm not getting as many cows bred as I want to. And then all of a sudden we had this revolution there where that flipped the script.
mhm,
So I think a lot of the beef on dairy started as that was dairy's inventory management program. If I breed her crossbred, I'm not tempted to keep that calf back. I'm kind of forced. We got to find another purpose for some of those calves and right size our heifer inventories. So the price is definitely a thing. I think it's a good thing for the dairy industry, but I also like there's a small hair of caution of we can get really wrapped up in calf price, but you
mhm.
got to have everything else working right in management on the farm as well, and not get too concerned about, well, I want to change or chase the price on some of these calves because it's going to change back. Um, I don't know when, I don't know how, but
Right.
it's always fluctuating.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our first conversations started with the breeding. So if we hear some of those prices, but there's definitely differences between the Holstein crossbreds and Jersey crossbreds. We're starting to see differences between the bull calves and the heifer calves. So yep, we're definitely hearing some high prices. Not everything's getting that. Um, and where I'm really interested, see the interest shifting a little bit. And you have a lot to talk about on this. Um, we really talked so much at the beginning about what breed are you picking? How are we picking the bull? We still got to raise that calf. What's the
Right.
management of the calf, treating them right from birth, which I think most of our dairies are doing an excellent job of. And maybe we need to do a little bit better job telling that story and working with our beef partners, those feedlot partners who are paying those high prices for a calf.
Mhm.
Yep, they got colostrum. We did all the right things. We did the best we could so they can do the best they can once they get to your farm.
Yeah, as you know, I love this topic, and I really want to dig into this a little bit with you because I think what's really cool about some of the work that you've been doing is you did one of the early on surveys with your dairy producers about what their practices were for beef on dairy calves early enough that you actually were able to update that survey in this past year. So can you talk a little bit about some of the questions you were asking, some of the big take homes, and more importantly, what have you seen any changes in producer attitudes since you did your first survey, which was what, 29?
Between 2018 2019.
Yeah, yeah. So it's about what, 4 years later, you had the follow up. So in those 4 years, what changes did you see with your dairy producers that you were surveying?
So, good question. So, I think in terms of sire selection and breeds and so on and so forth, in the survey, the results are fairly similar. I think it depends on where you're at in the country. So we have a very Wisconsin Midwest, upper Midwest centric view. We get into things, is there potential for our CAB markets? So hair coat color and markings and so forth does come out on these surveys, especially if you're selling less than a week old calves. That is a thing that definitely comes up in the discussions. Um, so I think just informally talking to producers, trying to learn a little bit more about what your semen supplier, their philosophy, what they're providing you. I say this tongue in cheek, but it's every once in a while I do run into this. We ask them, okay, well, how are you making your breeding decisions? We're breeding in black. Well, that could be Angus, that could be Simmental, that could be Limousine. That's really not telling me much there. Um, we need to dig a little bit deeper than that. Um, So I always put that little plug in there. And I think if we talk to some of our beef colleagues, they might say they probably see as much, if not more, variation within the beef breeds today than maybe between some of the beef breeds.
Hmm.
So how can we start some of those conversations about how do we select bulls within those breeds? So if you're selling very young calves, your incentive is more, let's look at the semen costs. We got to make sure the conception's there. I don't want to have to worry about calving problems. I think that's very logical from the dairy producer standpoint. I think where we want to start continuing the conversation, though, is can you work with your supplier? Can you do some of your own selections? So maybe those bulls are also ranked on a terminal sire index. So we know there's some feedlot performance, some carcass performance data behind them as well. So they have that added value once they go further up the chain.
What about that early life care? I think I've heard some people think, those bull calves or those beef calves aren't getting the same quality of colostrum. They're not getting the same quality of care in early life. What are your producers telling you that they're doing with those calves in the first 24 hours?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think most and I think a lot of this comes back to employee training and so on and so forth. Once I get my employees trained in, I want them to follow my protocols, right?
Hmm.
So if I start differentiating, we'll treat these calves this way and these calves that way, I kind of confuse that, and I'm inviting some errors to occur here. So one of the things we talked about in the survey, there might be some differences between the farms that are retaining some of these calves versus marketing them all at a young age. When do we start vaccinating them? What do we vaccinate them for? So on and so forth. We did pick up on some differences there, and I think that's that after birth young calf care thing that we're still investigating. We're still exploring what the right answers are there or not. Uh, for some of those questions. And it comes back a little bit maybe to some of the sire selection. If I'm direct marketing some of these calves as finished beef off my farm, trying to do some value added to my dairy farm, um, maybe I'm picking for a more moderate frame size, something that's going to finish a little bit quicker. Uh, Hair coat color may not be quite as big of a consideration in those
Hmm.
cases. So I think in most cases, we saw very similar care. Now, that said, I think there's some general things on calf care we can talk about across the board with both the heifer calves and the beef calves. What is the right amount of colostrum and feed, the timing, how are we doing compliance on this checking that we're doing, what we think that we're doing, so on and so forth. I'm not the calf expert, so I defer to them, but we have quite a range in birth weights in some of these calves. They can be
Hmm.
60 pounds up to 100 pounds. We have one standard amount of colostrum to feed them. So maybe that's something we need to investigate a little bit further, and how can we tailor maybe some of these protocols to individual calves, account for some of the differences in calf birth weight, calving difficulty, so on and so forth.
Well, maybe we need to. I know you have your three C's that you talk about with the semen selection, the cost of the semen, the conception rate, and the calving ease. Maybe we should add a fourth thing that producers should consider, and that's consistency. And trying to
Yes.
breed for that consistent type of calf that we know how to manage. Yeah, we had when we were running this trial, we had some pretty big boys that we got, all Angus, right? All the same, all Angus Holstein crosses, but saw quite a bit even within some of our same source farms, of variation in birth weights there. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm trying to find the right way to phrase this. It's still a newer practice, but it is
Mhm.
not a brand new practice. So that's one of the things we found in the second survey, that there's farms that were 5, 6 years into this. I think the range, like the majority were between that 3 and 6 years experience. So different program that I was a part of a couple weeks ago. Some of those dairy producers were talking about, well, this is what we were doing when we first started using beef on
Mhm.
dairy. Well, in the past couple of years, this is what we learned. So now we're picking bulls differently. So we're kind of getting to that point of farms are finding out, this is what we tried at first. This is what I liked. This is what I didn't like. Now we're starting to make some adjustments there. So I think that's going to be a good thing.
I'm really interested to see. I think this ties back into sire selection, but also some of our calf care stuff. I'm interested to see how dairy producers will be incentivized, to make better decisions, right? I mean, I think they're making great decisions right now for the most part. I don't think anybody's making bad decisions when it comes to beef on dairy. But for example, we know that our dairy producers, a lot of times they don't really select for things that a beef producer might, like carcass quality, carcass traits, things like that. Because again, they're selling them as wet calves, or very young calves, a lot of them. Or I mean, the producers that are keeping them are probably making some different decisions on that, like you mentioned. But when it comes to sire selection, that's not going to be impacted when the dairy's marketing their calves. And when it comes to early life calf care, we are seeing some more calf buyers incentivized for things uh, serum total proteins, and making sure that we have calves with good colostrum management, and those dairy producers are getting incentivized to have good colostrum management on their young calves. So I think one of the things I'm curious about with this industry trend in the next few years is, as it kind of cools off a little bit, it's hot right now. Everybody's buying things for, it's easy to make money with beef on dairy right now. Economics tend to swing back and forth, right? So I expect this market's going to cool off before too long. I don't know when that's going to be. It might be soon. It might be a little ways down the road, but at some point it's going to cool off. And so I'm really curious, and we don't have the answer to this, but I'm really curious to see um, how dairy producers are going to be incentivized and what that's going to look like, as we kind of move forward and this becomes more of the norm in the industry. So, any thoughts about that? I mean, like I said, we don't have a crystal ball, so it's impossible to say. But I'm curious what your perspective is.
No, definitely good question. I'm glad you brought it up. So if we talk about the three C's, four C's, I think we threw hair, coat, color in there in the
Mm-hmm.
first survey.
So five
Uh,
C's. We're at a lot of C's by now.
yeah, we're on a roll here.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think it's a very valid point. It's a free market. There's supply and demand. We need to look at where we're at with the U.S. North American beef supply right now. It's definitely having an influence on prices. And maybe somewhat related to that, there's that biological leg in there. So we've talked about surveys in other conversations, and they're always out of the date by the
Mm,
time you finish it and get it
right.
out there. It's always historical look. Um, so your breeding season today, it's 9 months before you get that calf, and then what, we're 14, give or take a month or before it's harvested. So some of the information and all the things we're hearing now is either decisions that were made a couple of years ago, and we're just starting to see the impact of them today. So I don't know, classic extension answer, but I do think, again, just keeping your eye on the trends of the supply, both on the beef side, also dairy replacement side. We're starting to hear some things on where that supply, did we right size that? Did maybe some uncertainty if we went a little too far or not? But I always think back to the example of milk quality.
Hmm.
Um, Early in my extension career, we did a lot of work on that, trying to help farmers improve, receive premiums, so on and so forth. Helped a lot of farms, helped improve production, but now that's kind of the expectation
Right.
today. So I think there's some parallels we can draw with between that and this beef and dairy market. Um, yes, that might be okay today. I think as extension educators, it's still good for us to continue talking about some of these other things because we've seen a change on other management things in the past. So there's definitely that possibility, supply changes, so on and so forth. These calves might be scrutinized more, and we want those producers to be ready for that.
I think I also have this conversation with my beef colleagues a bit because, like I say, the market's probably going to cool off. But like you've talked about a lot as we've been having this conversation, it started as an inventory management tool. And I've heard people say like, "Oh, beef on dairy, that's going to be just a flash in the pan. It's not going to be here very much longer." But I don't think we're going to be getting the same prices we're getting forever. I don't think beef on dairy is going to go anywhere, especially as we see preg rates are getting, like, we have really turned the corner. It seems a base probably a lot. Paul Ferky can probably take a lot of credit for some of this these improvements that we're seeing. But we've really turned the corner when it comes to repro. We have sex semen. We have genomic data. We know what cows we want to get heifers out of. We don't need to produce as many heifers as we did when our preg rates were under 20. Now we're seeing a lot of farms over 30, pushing 40%, right? And so what is going to be, as we have more of these farms that are doing so well on the repro side, what is going to be the point of conventional semen? Um, like Holstein bulls, what's going to be the point of Holstein bulls unless you're trying to produce a sire for the industry? So, um, so yeah, we have some of those discussions around the break room table here. Um, but yeah, I don't think that this is a I think this market's going to cool off, but I think that we're going to have to figure out, like you said, it's going to be the expectation. It's going to become the norm, that we have to be producing these good quality calves, because even if we're not getting $800 a pop for them anymore, there's still going to be an inventory management tool that dairies are going to need to manage their replacements.
Definitely, unless we find some other way. So I know on the beef side, talking to farmers and colleagues, some have said like if we could get a few more Holstein steers, like we had that system down, we didn't want to abandon it, so we still want to source them. But it's definitely an inventory management thing. One of the things going back to those surveys, I think there's also this practical management aspect that we have to keep in mind as well. Maybe we'll get to the point where it's all sex semen, embryo transfer that's been dabbled with in the industry as well. Both for producing our replacement heifers as well as maybe producing some full-blooded beef calves. Um, but as we were doing some of the survey work, some of these old themes keep popping up. It's she's only going to get so many chances at either sex semen or dairy semen before we switch to beef, and we just need to get her pregnant. And so I always think about that as well in the sex semen aspect as well. At some point, you make this switch, you make this decision, whether it's second service, third service, so on and so forth, that we just want to get her bred. That is our number one priority. And so maybe we still have a place for that conventional semen. I think we can plan as much as we want to who we want to breed for replacement heifer and who we want to breed for beef. But again, if that cow repeats and she's a multiple time breeder, we have to change some of that stuff on the fly, right? And our priority shifts to we want that cow in a state and herd. For her to do that, we need to get her pregnant.
I think we're both kind of lucky to be early enough in our career that we're going to be able to watch a lot of this unfold. And we're going to be, at some point, we're going to be the old farts looking back and being like, back in my day, nobody ever thought about beef semen until. And it'll sound so weird to the students that we're working with and the young farmers we're working with. But normally at this state, normally this is about the time when I try to transition to our final three questions, but I do have other things to ask you about. So I think we're going to keep talking. Hopefully our listeners don't mind. Um, we talked about the great prices that we're getting right now for some of these beef calves. There's also not milk prices aren't particularly great everywhere right now, and so not that I want to see dairy producers leave the industry, but I think it's a very tempting proposition for a lot of folks at this time. And I know you said you've been working with some producers that are transitioning from a beef enterprise or from a dairy enterprise to a beef enterprise. So, what are some of the things that you talk about with those producers when they're first trying to make those decisions, and how do you kind of work them through that?
Yeah, and it depends. It's case by case. This is something my colleagues and I have been talking about. Some of this observations we've seen over the years, and it's like, why didn't we write this down? This um, should be a program that we, it didn't dawn on us. We're just kind of going through it step by step.
Yeah.
But I do think it ties it back a little bit to some of the beef and dairy stuff because we see all sorts of different strategies out there. I've seen herds that might use a very high percentage beef because that's their exit strategy. Then we're
Hmm.
not dealing with some of those replacements. We're just going to deal with the milking herd, or they can source their replacement heifers, maybe more economically, better genetics from another herd. Likewise, I have dairy producers that have maybe backed off on the beef on dairy because they have an outlet for some of their fresh
Hmm. Hmm.
heifers, and that's another business strategy for them. Great idea. So I think there's more case by case we see out there. So I think in this transition from dairy to beef, um, some of the bigger things that we start talking about feeding them is different. There's a lot of similarities, but we do want to just your expectations on the nutrition program. You have that cow herd. If you're doing cow calf, they're kind of moving through the production cycle together. They're all
Hmm.
calving at the same season. They're all dry at the same season. So instead of having multiple rations on the same farm like we do with the dry cow ration, lactating ration, and dairy herd. Um, well, now we need to think about we got to change as our production cycle changes. we've extremely educated our dairy producers well on corn processing and those things. The ultra fine ground corn does not work well in most of our beef rations, and so that's something we've had to uneducate some of our dairy producers on. And maybe just some of the general handling things as well. We have some dairy facilities that could be retrofitted, but there are some considerations for that. That's going to work better for beef than dairy. How you handling, learn, you're going to have to relearn some stockmanship skills. Beef animals are different than dairy animals when it comes to our handling practices. That's sometimes hard to talk some very experienced farmers through on of, well, I've been with cows all my life. You're not going to tell me how to work with cows. Um, and I'm not, but I'm just going to tell you it's different. Just
Yep.
trust me, it's going
Yeah.
to be different. Um, and then I think the last thing is marketing. So in the dairy industry, we're in a lot of cases we're selling week-old calves. When we have market cows, we're trying to move them off the farm on a timely basis, not hang on to them too long. But a lot of times that's we're selling ones and twos, we're selling every week or every other week. Whereas when you start thinking about beef, we kind of frame it as marketing versus just selling,
Mhm.
advocating for yourself, putting the best group of cattle together that you can, trying to move away from this. I'll just sell ones and twos whenever I feel like I need to sell cattle and really market, go sit through some sales, see what buyers are looking for in your area, re-educate yourself on that aspect.
Do you see folks, we just got in this discussion here at Iowa State a couple weeks ago, kind of as more of a hypothetical, but do you see a lot of producers or any producers that are using those crosses as their replacement heifers for a beef herd?
I can't tell you how many. I've definitely had those conversations. I definitely know of a few that are doing it. And at these prices, I know that's definitely a consideration because beef replacement heifer prices are more towards the high end of the cycle as
Mhm.
well. The caution that we definitely want to put out there with that is those animals are going to retain some dairy characteristics in their genetics, not
Mhm.
just in that 50-50 cross, but generations down the line. Every once in a while, you see some of the frame or the long dairy face or some of those things pop up again. And if you think about the longevity of that beef animal versus, it might be a little bit longer than some of our dairy cows are staying in the herd. That cow could be in your herd for 10 or more years. And so this is a very long lasting impact as you start out forming your beef herd. So whenever possible, we do really and try and encourage our producers start out with full blooded beef
Mhm.
animals if you're getting into the cow calf aspect of it. Those crosses are probably better suited. Let's run them through the feedlot, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Now, that said, farms are definitely dabbling with retaining their crosses as well. And maybe that's an avenue that they want to focus in more on the feeding and finishing aspect before they jump into cow calf. We see it going both ways.
I'm interested if the maternal traits are the same for a beef cross versus a straight bred beef. I would imagine that beef crosses are going to, or beef cross with Holstein is going to be less maternal than a straight bred beef cow would be in a cow calf operation. But I guess I don't have, that's just a guess. I don't have any data to support that. But
Yep. No, we were talking about that as well, and I can't recall data off the top of my head on the spot. But I do think maybe there's some differences in milk production, and some of those things. So you got to right size, or should reframe that as match your beef enterprise to your resources.
mm,
So if we want to bring in, say, that crossbred, higher milk production potential, and I'm going to throw her on pasture all summer, and she needs to fend for herself, that may not be the best match between your environment and that animal. Let's find an animal that is going to thrive more on that lower input, maybe more intensive grazing situation. Think about that before you just jump into it. We have a lot of those conversations.
well, great. Really interesting discussion this morning. I think a lot of times when we have some of these conversations about beef on dairy, it's a lot of it is like, well, I don't really know, because the data is just not out there on a lot of things. But I've heard a lot of actionable things from you this morning, or whenever people are listening. For us, we're recording it in the morning. Heard a lot of really actionable things, and I think sometimes it's really easy to focus on the, oh, here are gaps in knowledge, and we have to do that, right? Because we're trying to apply for grants and find out who's going to give us money to solve some of these issues. But so it's easy to focus on what we don't know, but there's a lot of stuff that we are learning, and I think we know a lot more than we did just even a couple years ago. So
Definitely. Our industry, those beef and dairy industries are both dealing with bovines. They're intertwined. Um, I can't emphasize the communication enough. We need to
Mm,
keep learning how to communicate with each other.
absolutely. Well, any last thoughts before we jump into our three questions that we ask all of our guests?
No, I think it's been a great discussion. I appreciate it, and I'm sure we're gonna have a version 2.0 and on the beef and dairy and some of that stuff. And then Carleagues in other states that we've been collaborating with as well are
Yeah.
investigating this. So I think this is one of those really unique opportunities that we're talking across state lines with that mutual interest.
Well, and that's the thing that we've really discovered is that our these animals don't stay within a state. So even just talking to some folks over in New York, some of our extension colleagues over there found out that some of their baby calves are coming our way out in Iowa. So yeah, it's kind of crazy how the lines get blurred um, across states when we're talking about some of these animals. So it's been a lot of fun because I've gotten to meet both of us. We've had the opportunity to meet a lot of people that we probably wouldn't have had to gotten to meet and gotten to work pretty closely with.
Definitely.
It's time for our famous three. Typical fresh cow incidence of clinical hypocalcemia is 3 to 6%, while subclinical hypocalcemia affects 50% or more mature cows. Based on cutting-edge research, Exelite offers a new approach that is build effective and the ZDUs. For more information, visit www.protecta.com.
All right. So with that, we'll jump into our three questions that we end every show with. So the first one is, what is your favorite dairy related book or resource?
So I think, along with many other extension services, we're kind of still doing some of the traditional publication, but shifting more to the online. Should we be doing podcasts or more webinars, so on and so forth? Um, so I don't have one in particular, but I think as I've gone further in my career, I focus less on just knowing. I definitely need to know what my Wisconsin colleagues are doing, but I want to find out what others are doing as well. So
Hmm.
other extensions have always been very welcoming to let us sit in, so on and so forth. So I've definitely sat in on some of the New York and Iowa and other webinars as well. So that's currently what I'm doing, is trying to broaden my horizons and see what we're doing across the border as well.
Good answer. What is your favorite non dairy related book or resource?
So I was not prepared for this question, so I don't have one in particular.
You only focus on dairy. Yeah, that's the only thing you have time for.
I think there's definitely things to be learned from looking at how other people in other industries tackle problems. Maybe it's not necessarily their exact solution to the solution we need, but kind of how they approach it, their thought process. So I definitely take my time, either for casual reading, to see what other people are doing. I think it's good to look at other things and not just dairy.
Hmm.
Um, and sometimes it's good just to be outdoors, get some sunshine. Um, I think I always joke around, get me up and take a walk around the block. That's when all the ideas come. When I'm sitting at my
Yep,
workstation in the office, that is not when the ideas come.
absolutely. And we're getting hopefully close to that time of year where it's easier to do that and we don't have to fight with the snow and cold. So, yeah. Yeah. All right. And so our last question is that what sets successful dairy professionals apart from those who are not successful?
Good question. I think there's a lot of different things. I'm definitely not the expert at this. So I might answer slightly differently with more of an extension twist. So I think I've always had a strong interest in the biology and the animal, the cow herself, in my career. And I was really blessed to also have coworkers that were really excellent on the people side of it. And maybe that was where I had to develop more skills. It's not my natural area. So having that counterbalance, I think has been really helpful. So I always come back to that, that maybe, yep, I love the biology. I love that
Hmm.
aspect of it, but always remember the people aspect of it as well. So we lost two of them in the past year. And so I always reflect back on that of,
Hmm.
they definitely had the people side of it down, and always kind of keep that as a little bit of an anchor back there as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a great perspective. I talked to my students about this a lot too, and they're dairy science, animal science, just like we were, right? So really focus on the biology, nerds about the science side of things. And one of the things we come back to a lot is that you can know exactly how a cow works, right? And you can know how a dairy farm is supposed to work, but the people are the ones who do the work, like that actually are the ones who make it happen. And if the people aren't on board, and you don't have those people and those communication skills down, then it all just kind of falls apart.
Definitely. As you reflect back on extension, you definitely need the technical skills and that background, so on and so forth. But when we're talking about change and impact, there are days I'm like, I really need a psychology degree.
Yeah.
Uh,
I actually was talking to a dairy producer a few days ago. His dad made him go get a college degree, and he got a degree in psychology and took that back to the farm. And I was like, that more people should do that. That would be such a great skill set.
we're on to something.
Yeah. All right. Well, it was great to talk to you today, Ryan. Great to catch up on some of the stuff that you've been working on. And if people want to find out more information about some of the things you've been doing or stay up to date on what you're working on, where can they go?
In our Wisconsin extension system, we have a dairy devoted website as long as livestock devoted website. So some of the beef and dairy stuff tends to be placed more on the livestock
Mhm.
website, but we still have a lot on our dairy side as well, especially on the reproduction side. And also upcoming programs. So registration's full now, but we are doing a pilot project again talking about this transition and how we can help some people looking with less experience on the beef side. I'll get them.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on today. Thanks for the great conversation. Looking forward to having future conversations on and offline.
I appreciate it. Thank you.